Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on the Dancer job in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. Sorry these thoughts videos, and including some of the more proper EX guides, have just been kind of slow so far this expansion. While I've actually just wanted to sit down and play Final Fantasy XIV more than ever, I've also just been dealing with my own personal stuff, so those of you who have been around the past couple of years probably know what I'm referring to. But regardless, we're going to start getting these thoughts videos out for you guys, because I get asked every day what I think of every job that I've leveled so far. I've leveled Dancer, Machinist, and Bard, so we will be doing some ranged comparisons probably in the near future, even before some of the balance changes come out, as well as Gunbreaker, White Mage, Paladin, and I'm forgetting one, Black Mage, which I actually had a lot of fun with. So we're going to do this first video on Dancer. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the job, improvements I think they can make, as well as a basic rotation, or at least a priority system that you can use to get started with the job overall. So first up, my thoughts on the actual job. It was actually the first job that I leveled in the expansion. I took it right from 60 to 70. Took about 6 to 7 hours of just straight up dungeon spamming. Then did the Shadowbringers main scenario with it, and was my first job to 80. It was the first job I took into the Extreme Primals, and it's the job that I try to prioritize playing when I just really want to play something in maximum comfort zone. I have a lot of fun playing it. I think the job flows really well, and it's just fun to play at a lot of various levels. You know, the big thing with Dancer I found is I got synced down in a Total Rock, one of the first things I did in the expansion. And it's when I realized Standard Step was level 15, and this game was not ready for a 1000 potency, even with fall-off damage AoE. Going through a 9.5 minute Total Rock at level 60, you know, synced down was just an incredible experience. And on top of that, when you get to level 66, 70, 72, and eventually 80, you just get these tools along the way that just add a little bit more enjoyment, especially at level 72 when I got Flourish. That was probably the big time where I really started enjoying it. Overall, though, it's a job that's very much focused on the flow of battle and being able to adapt to RNG. People who have maybe played the older versions of Bard, and even the current version of Bard, or even the older versions of Machinist, probably are kind of used to this setting where you're fishing for a lot of various RNG elements, and you have to prioritize them in order to maximize your gameplay. So the big thing with Dancer is the flourishes. Whenever you use any of your basic weapon skills, you have a chance to get a finishing move called a flourish, which is stronger and has a chance of giving you a 4-fold feather. With the 4-fold feathers, you use those on OGCDs, one single target, once a point blank AoE, and then those will sometimes give you a flourishing feather, which lets you access Fandance 3, which is a ranged AoE that you can aim at the target. It's a very basic flow. You know, Fandance 3 is always prioritized over Fandance 1 or 2, whether it's single target or AoE. And then your Flourish GCDs take priority over your non-Flourish GCDs, because those are going to give you priority to get things like the 4-fold feathers, and that's really good for preparing for powerful burst phases. On top of that, once you get to the higher levels, you unlock Esprit, which you get when you or your dance partner, which you're going to be buffing up with a permanent 5% damage buff the entirety of the fight. You are going to be generating that from the weapon skills that you use, or the weapon skills or spells that they use, and you're going to get to do this super powerful 600 potency AoE with fall off, of course. That is really satisfying to hit. I've had some 40 to 50k saber dances, which is super satisfying. You know, it's like a mini drill in a sense, you know, slightly lower potency than drill for machinists, but it feels really good when you actually get to use it, although I definitely have some things that I'd like to see adjusted about saber dance overall. However, it's not called Dancer for nothing. The two other things that you do, Standard Step and Technical Step, are both basically the same thing. Standard Step is a 2-part dance where you have to press the buttons that light up and then execute the final standard finish. And that will not only do 1000 potency to the first target it hits plus fall off damage, it will also buff you and your dance partner, which you can do at level 60. Stop harassing people in level 50 dungeons for dance partner. They don't have it. It'll give you both a permanent 5% damage buff. Now, I say permanent because you'll pretty much be using Standard Step on cooldown. There's very few situations where you delay it for any point or period of time, although we will talk about that again a little bit later. And thus, you know, you're just responsible for 5% of your partner's DPS generally. On top of that, Technical Finish, which you get at level 70, does a similar thing. You know, it does 1500 potency after a 4-step dance, but it's 5% to everyone in range of you when you execute it. So it's this nice little extra 5% for you and the person you're dancing with, and another 5% for everybody else. So the amount of damage that you're providing to the raid is noticeable. People are 100% going to be looking at Dancer and thinking, well, I want to be their partner, and it's great to be their partner, and I'm going to notice it every time I have a dancer in the party. And that's very significant because you want to feel like that party slot is having a lot of impact, considering it otherwise should probably be and is currently the lowest DPS job in the game in regards to personal DPS. They do also have another buff they can give their partner, Devilment, which is 20% direct hit and critical hit rate. It's just great. You know, nobody's going to turn down direct hits and critical hits, especially not your permanently buffed dance partner as well. On top of that, they have the usual ranged DPS utility where they can reduce damage for the entire group by 10% for a short time once every 3 minutes. And they also have a heal, which isn't that significant of a heal. Curing Waltz is a nice little thing to throw into on top of everything else on an AoE. I look at it the most for like white hole mechanics, and that's a mechanic where people need to be healed to max health, otherwise the attack will have some sort of bonus effect. It's generally going to be something that kills them. You know, there are so many times back in Stormblood where people need to be topped off and someone's missing like a few thousand health, and the healer has to give a whole extra heal just to make sure those players are topped off, and it was just so much overhealing for such a fickle mechanic. That's the kind of thing that I look at Curing Waltz and go, okay, so that's definitely going to be a place where that's a little bit more useful. Oh, also, Dancer easily has the most fun movement skill in the game. And Avant, dude, once you've played Dancer, playing anything but Dancer and not having an Avant is just a totally different experience. Yeah, gap closers and, you know, the backflips for Dragoon and all that stuff, it could be cool, but an Avant is just so freeing. This fixed distance dash where you could just zip around the arena, fix mistakes that you've made in the blink of an eye, get to an area where you can just, you know, kind of relax, not have to worry so much about how quick your response or your movement is. But it is a fixed distance. I've killed myself with it before, gone into a wall. Sorry, that was on Eden Prime. But it is what it is, and you just got to make sure you don't, you know, chasse away off of a wall, you know? Overall, I've thought the job was awesome. It's the job I would 100% prioritize playing if given a choice inside of a raid scenario, and it is the job I do plan on raiding on for the entirety of 5.x, unless, of course, they change something that I don't like, in which case I found the other two ranged physical DPS to be a lot of fun also, so I'm feeling really comfortable in that role this expansion. However, I did say things aren't perfect for Dancer, and I think there are definitely things we're going to see adjustments for, whether we see them in patch 5.05, which is after this video is coming out, or if it happens in 0.1, 0.2, whatever. I fully expect certain changes to be made, and then I also just have a wish list of changes that I hope they make, which we might as well go over now. So number one, I mentioned earlier that while Saber Dance, you know, it's this nice, powerful hit that you get whenever you have the Esprit for it, it also kind of breaks the flow of the job for that one global cooldown. You know, the rest of your global cooldowns are all focused on fishing for this RNG. You know, you're using your basic weapon skill to try and get the empowered version of the weapon skill, to try and get a feather, to try and get a flourishing feather. There's this flow to it where you can kind of expect, you know, based on every button hit, what the next action could possibly be. When you press Saber Dance, you're kind of just pressing it because it's available, because it's, you know, you would overcap your Esprit or you're in the middle of a burst window, and it doesn't kind of add to any of that flow. In fact, it kind of digs into it, because if you get too many Saber Dances back to back, you end up in a situation where you really want to hit your flourishes, and it's just not optimal to do so because you're either going to overcap on Esprit or it's a burst window and you want your highest hitting abilities to be available. You're also playing your odds when it comes to Saber Dance, because theoretically, Reverse Cascade and Fountain Fall, your two single target flourishing attacks, could equate to more potency than a Saber Dance if you include getting a fourfold feather and a flourishing feather. You know, that would equal a higher amount, but it just, you got to play your odds. Why take the 50% and 50% when you could take the 100% odds during a burst window and really make use of all those stacking raid buffs? So the big change I'd like to see made to Saber Dance is for it to extend your on GCD flourishes by 5 seconds up to a maximum of 20 seconds. That way, when you make the decision to go and use Saber Dance, it's not interrupting the flow of the rest of the combat. Yes, you may not get to hit those flourishes during a burst window, but it doesn't matter because you made the highest probability play. You took the ability that was guaranteed the most damage without having to focus on any RNG, and you used it during a time when it would benefit the most. And I don't think you should be punished for that just because you got a bunch of them back to back, and then maybe the boss jumps, maybe you can't actually get to point blank range for your AoE flourishes, which are still good on single targets. So I think that would help a lot, giving Saber Dance that extension of those buffs. Another one I'd really like to see is improvisation. So I haven't talked about improvisation at all this video, but it's a channeled skill like collective, like meditate, you know, various other skills that are in the game that not only gives everyone around you increased healing received as long as they've been hit by it, as long as they're inside the channeled effect, but it also gives you esprit per tick, depending on how many party members are near you. Now, that's the part in particular I want to see change. So I've had plenty of situations where, you know, there's no targets available. I'm using improv and people walk out of range of it, whether they're jumping around because they're bored during the in-between phase because they've done it a million times, or they're actually getting into position before the boss becomes available to hit again, which is a totally, you know, legitimate and uptime related, you know, optimized thing to do. And to ask them to stay in my improv so I can make sure I get 10 esprit generation is just kind of annoying. So I'd like to just see improv be a flat amount of esprit generation per tick instead of relying on nearby party members. This actually opens up some more uses for it. Right now, improv you're either using during downtime or you're activating it and deactivating it really quickly to get 5 seconds of increased healing for you and the people near you. It's very similar to the way you see people use things such as, I guess, collective, where you ever see like wings from a paladin or collective pop up really quick and they get rid of it. It's just for that momentary time where you get 5 seconds of the effect that it would have generated. So while it is useful in those situations, it would be more useful if you could also use it kind of like Anotman is used now, which is weird because I really don't want to advocate for more Anotman style things inside of rotations, especially because then it's likely to get included in the opener if you don't need it later. But if improv could just give 10 esprit regardless of nearby party members, so you don't have to consider dead people, you don't have to consider people who need to move beforehand to get into a mechanic, even just having that basic improved usage would definitely feel better on Dancer. Finally, I'd actually like to see them extend the radius of standard step and technical step. You know, it's really awkward having this 15 yalm AoE around you when sometimes you can attack from, sometimes you need to be attacking from further away for a mechanic. It's not super often, but it absolutely happens, even on some of the smaller boss arenas where you have to take a mechanic closer to the wall, but it's also a time when you want to be standard stepping, but you're kind of out of range of it because, you know, you're more than 15 yalms away. So I'd like to see it increase to 20 yalms, match the weapon skill range of Dancer, which I believe is 20 yalms, and I could actually check since I'm logged into the game right now. 25 yalms is actually those. I'd at least like to see it be 20 yalms instead of 15 yalms. It just doesn't feel good to have it at that set, especially if you and your dance partner are on other sides of the arena. That's definitely not a good thing. Speaking of being on other sides of the arena, that really doesn't affect standard step as much as it affects technical step. Where I've had to dodge a mechanic, it's been the optimal time for me to use technical step. You know, it's something that I already had to sit on for a second or two. It's got to be my next GCD. But now I'm also trying to dodge this mechanic at the same time, and I'm not able to buff all my party members, you know? So yes, that's something every job does have to deal with, and I could totally understand them not adjusting the radius on this. It should come down to player execution. Maybe you do have to delay it for a specific mechanic because it's just the right thing to do, and that's perfectly okay. But it would be nice quality of life, and I'd say that not asking for it doesn't mean, you know, I'd rather ask for it and get it than not ask for it. I don't care if it makes it easier to hit mobs in the open world with my AoE, which is probably one of the reasons why it's only 15 yalms, so you don't pull everything in the open world every time you want to use it, but I don't know. I could deal with that. I'm not really concerned about that. I just want it to be 20 yalms instead of 15. Now, on top of that, I did mention earlier that Dancer is the lowest DPS job in the game on average, and this should be the case. You know, Ninja has always been on the lower end of DPS, and Dancer should, in my opinion, always be the lowest potential ceiling of DPS in the game. I mean, when you look at standard step, it's 5% increased DPS to that person for the entire fight, because you should have 100% uptime on it. And, you know, let's say you have let's just say someone's dealing 10,000 DPS, which is not a very high number right now. It's certainly better than some other situations I've had in the Party Finder, but, you know, it's just a nice even number to work with. Just at that number, it's already 500 raid DPS being permanently added, because there's no point where it's not benefiting that player unless you die or they die. So there's already that, and then as the highest DPS player goes up, that contribution only goes up to you and your, you know, you and your dance partner. So There's that. Technical Step has a pretty effective raid DPS increase as well, and Devilment is going to be a really nice increase for that same person you're already buffing. So because of this raid DPS contribution that they have, you know, they kind of always have to be on the lower end of the DPS scale. That being said, you know, I've said that they don't really need potency buffs in the past, but I've been looking through FF logs. I've looked through 75 percentiles, 99 percentiles, and it probably does need a little help alongside Ninja, because I know Ninjas are like, you think Dancer needs something? No, Ninja, trust me, Ninja's harder to play and probably could use that love more than Dancer. But I have a feeling Dancer is probably going to get potency added to some of its skills. I think that it could use them along with a couple of other jobs. And I'd also like to point out at the Media Tour, almost every attack was 50 potency higher than it is now. I don't know if they're going to go with that method. I think the only one that wasn't was Saber Dance, but that might be a little overkill to do 50 potency on all of their GCDs specifically. But, you know, probably something that increases it by just a few hundred more points. I know a lot of people like to even compare Dancer, like, oh, look at how much Dancer does, look at how much Samurai does. Really, Dancer just needs to be compared to Bard and Machinist, because an optimal raid situation has one of every role, so if you are only bringing one ranged physical DPS, it's a consideration for a hardcore raid between a Dancer, a Bard, and a Machinist, not the Dancer or the Samurai. You know, it's just not the average way that people approach the raid scene when looking at the bare minimum. That 4th DPS spot, whole nother story. But that being said, I looked through some of Bard's numbers, I looked through some of Machinist numbers, and Dancer feels like it just might be a little bit too low below that bar, because Bard's already outdoing its DPS by a pretty fair margin in most encounters, and then that's without even including Battle Voice. So, you know, on top of that, Bard is still getting, even though they lost the crit and they lost some of their other utilities, they still do have that 20% direct hit buff, and that is not something that can be overlooked, especially because it's substantial. The only thing is it doesn't work on the Bard itself, which is a little unfortunate, but Dancer will probably get a little bit of a potency buff. Even without it, it'll probably be fine, but I fully expect that. So while this video has gone on a little bit longer than I initially wanted it to, I did say I would talk about the rotation, and the main reason I want to talk about the rotation for Dancer is because while there is an opener, there's a reopener, there's a delayed opener, you know, there's a few different options. The general rotation between openers is entirely a priority system, where you look at your highest priority abilities and use those first before falling back to some of your more basic things. You know, for example, Flourish is holding priority over basic GCDs because you don't want to risk losing them. Maybe you have to hit them during a certain burst window. You know, you want to make sure you don't forget to use them in any sense. You don't want to overlap them. You don't want to overwrite them with a new version of the same Flourish, because that's a whole Flourish lost, which is a potential feather being lost, which is a potential flourishing feather being lost. It's a lot of dealing with potential procs you may get, and then reacting to each and every one of them while trying to use your dances pretty much on cooldown, with some, again, with some things in between that may make you consider otherwise. Alright, so on your screen now is the standard opener. This is something you can use in pretty much all content, and even though it may not be 100% optimized, it's at least a basis through which you can develop fight-specific adjustments. There are going to be times where you want to move these abilities around in a different order to better suit the first 20 to 30 seconds of a fight. So do not just do this without considering the actual encounter that you're a part of. That's a big part of openers and why we have different openers for different jobs in the first place. So if your group is really kind of really patient and they'll allow you to do a standard step pre-pull and finish it so you can give you and your dance partner 5% extra damage, it's nice. It's 5% more, you know, damage on your first standard step that actually hits the target, and then jobs that you're tethered to, that first GCD will be enhanced a little bit more. But, you know, other than that, it's not insanely important that you get that little bit of a buff. So if your group doesn't want to wait for you, don't be too surprised. Normally, though, what you will do is you can pop your potion before you actually start the pull, and then you can actually, or in this case, tinctures for this expansion, and then you can prep a standard step just a few seconds before the pull starts, and then as soon as the pull actually goes, you make sure you're in range, you hit standard finish, you got that really nice initial hit, that 1000 potency plus any buffs you may have at that point. Now, it's from this point where you have to consider what your next steps are going to be. You know, there's a delayed opener where you actually go into using Flourish immediately, and you use some of your finishing moves before doing Devilment in a technical step. almost every dancer goes right into devilment plus technical step. And this is going to be the only point in the fight, unless something really bad happens, where you're going to be using devilment before technical step. And we're going to explain why a little bit later. After you finish technical flourish, which takes about 5.5 seconds, you'll then use, technical finish, you'll use flourish, and now you've got all these procs to go through. At this point, you look at your global cooldown and off global cooldown priorities. The OGCD priority is simple. If you have Fan Dance 3, it takes priority over Fan Dances 1 or 2. That's it. Otherwise, use Fan Dance 1 for single target and Fan Dance 2 for AoE. For global cooldowns, it gets a lot more complicated. While technically, yes, Saber Dance holds priority over Fountain Fall, over Reverse Cascade, over Blood Shower, over Rising Windmill, there does become a point where you have to consider just using a Flourish, because if you don't use it, the potential loss in potency over the course of the fight, it just, if you have to lose them constantly over the fight because you're trying to prioritize Saber Dances, it's gonna add up. So while Saber Dance holds the highest priority here, if you're not gonna overcap your Esprit, it is worth considering using Blood Shower or Rising Windmill, because yes, you could buff that 600 potency during that burst window to deal more damage, but you also could potentially lose 350 potency because you just weren't using your flourishes. And this is the main reason why I talked about Saber Dance as one of the changes I want to make, because the thought of losing a flourish just because you want to use what should theoretically be your best ability during a certain scenario just doesn't make sense to me. I really hope they make that change in this entire section where I talk about, priority and using them, because you could lose a potential fourfold feather and a flourishing feather across the fight. I really hope we just don't have to have this conversation at some point in the future because they changed Saber Dance like I suggested earlier. But for now, Saber Dance, unless you're at risk of losing a flourish, in which case start using your finishing flourishes instead. Now, after your opener, people have asked me, should I be using Saber Dances and feathers as soon as I get them? Very easily, no. This is actually advice you can take into a lot of other jobs in Shadowbringers, because we've gotten charges for things. We've gotten, new gauges being added. The general rule of thumb is there's not much of a rush to use a gauge until it's full or almost full. In the case of Saber Dance, you don't have to use it as soon as you have enough to use it, unless you're like bursting a monster down like an ad, or there's some sort of really good reason for you to be using it immediately. You can hold on to Saber Dances until you're at 90 to 100 Esprit and then use it before you cap. You just want to make sure you're never just sitting at 100 Esprit for no reason at all. Even if you're 10 seconds before a burst window, you should be using your Saber Dance as soon as you get to 100 Esprit, because the risk of losing entire Saber Dances over the course of a fight because you wanted to save Esprit for burst windows does not equate to a higher DPS. Making sure you don't overcap equates to higher DPS. Also, when it comes to fourfold feathers, pretty much the same. You want to have 3 feathers on backup until you get to a burst window, and then only use feathers outside of a burst window if you're going to overcap on them. You just lose so much potency if you sit on 4 feathers, if you sit on 100 Esprit. So use feathers whenever you hit 4, or when you're in the middle of a burst window or trying to burst down an ad or something along those lines. And make sure you use Esprit if you're ever at 90 to 100 and you're at risk of overcapping. Those are the 2 most important things when doing sustained DPS as Dancer. Now, earlier I also mentioned a possible delayed opener. I've been messing around with this a little bit, and I guess my muscle memory may not be 100% there, but a delayed opener is where instead of after you do the standard finish on pull, immediately going into Devilment and Technical, you actually flourish and use your AoE abilities, your Blood Shower and your Rising Windmill, to potentially generate a couple of feathers early on, give your raid group a little bit of time to get their buffs going and to get their setup going, which usually for some jobs just takes a few GCDs for them to get to their really big burst windows or to set up raid buffs for the party. Things like Trick Attack or Divination, these are the kind of things that will be benefiting from you waiting just a couple of GCDs into the opener. And then after you use Blood Shower and Rising Windmill, you Devilment Technical Step, and then everything takes over from there. This also makes it so you're less likely to lose flourishes and gives you a lot more freedom to use Saber Dances during the burst window itself. Of course, if you don't get a lot of procs in your initial opener, it comes with the downside of you'll be pretty bored and you'll be like, well, now I don't have anything because those 2 flourishes that I just used. I didn't get feathers off of them. I did, now they're not being buffed by all these other things. So, there's always a pro and a con to these, and you got to just play your odds when it comes to these kind of things. Now, when it comes to the reopener, which will come every 2 minutes, Devilment and Technical Step are going to be lining up. Now, despite that, in the reopener, it is currently said that you should be going Devilment after Technical Finish in reopeners. And the main reason for this is because we've been saving up resources for that reopener. While you've been spending things if they overcap, it's been important to make sure that you are still sitting at a good amount of resources when you go into another burst window. So because of that, you have to weigh how long it takes to do 1500 potency in an optimal scenario versus, what I can be doing with my GCDs. So Technical Step takes 15 seconds. I'm sorry, 15 seconds. It takes 5.5 seconds to do 1500 potency. It takes 1.5 seconds after you initially hit Technical Step. Then each of your steps is going to take a second, and then on the 5.5 second mark, you'll activate Technical Finish. So in that time, you can get 3 GCDs and 4 OGCDs, potentially 5 if you want to consider that like half a second before the GCD. And that's not even including any skill speed you might have, which hopefully you don't have very much of it. So in that time, if you have Saber Dances, Flourishes, 4-fold Feathers saved up, the amount of damage that you can do in that window is a lot higher than what you would actually do in the 5.5 seconds with Technical Step. Yes, it feels great to have that 20% direct hit, that 20% crit on that Technical Step. When it direct crits, it feels so good. And if it doesn't, then the Devilment did nothing for that Technical Step, and that's 5.5 seconds of your burst window that just didn't benefit from anything. So banking on the RNG of direct hit and crit, even when you have higher numbers, when you have all these guaranteed resources and damage, you're just playing the odds and the numbers. You get any extra procs, you get any extra Saber Dances, it equates to way better. So right now, generally, you Devilment after Technical Step on your reopener. So yeah, generally Dancer is just about calculating your next 2 or 3 GCDs constantly, because otherwise you're just spending your dances pretty much as they become available. Standard Finish and Standard Step technically follow the same rules as Technical Step. If you can do more than 1000 potency in the next 2 GCDs and 3 OGCDs, then theoretically you shouldn't be using Standard Step, which is why very often you don't see people trying to hit a Standard Step in the middle of a Technical Step window, unless they got completely shafted. There's no proc, so there's really not much to gain from using anything there. And you could still technically hit that Standard Finish in that Technical Step time frame. That's really the only time it ever comes into consideration, is when you're completely exhausted of resources in the last 5 or so seconds of your buff window. So it is something that's worth considering doing, but you need to be very aware of your resources and the situation of the fight for Dancer. It's actually incredibly engaging, but for players who don't like monitoring RNG and procs, it's definitely not the type of job for you. I will say that generally, while I've given you a lot of little min-max advices and stuff, there are plenty of fights where I throw all that out the window. I'm talking to Twitch chat, and I still end up pulling up. I think one of my least focused pulls on Innocence EX in the 3rd day, and I don't think I've really done it since the 3rd or 4th day, was 9,480 DPS, which at the time I just tried checking FF logs and it just wouldn't load any of the EX data. I'm not sure why. Was the 96th percentile. I think 9,700 something was the 100th percentile of FF logs. And then I had one where I was like, okay, this time we're really going to try. And it did 8,900. And it was I was overthinking it so much. General rule of thumb is, as long as you're using these things as they become available and you're not overcapping and you're not spending things too early, you'll probably do okay at the very least. And it's a little bit relaxing and a little bit awkward at the same time, because I feel like I shouldn't be rewarded just for hitting things as they become available and not really optimizing them, but it's how it ends up working out. Yes, you will do better with those little optimizations I just gave you, but at the very least, make sure you're used to just using these abilities in their intended way, and then try to focus on individual fights where you can optimize, where it's, sometimes it's not feasible to do your point blank flourishes, or sometimes you got to play it really close like a melee DPS and dodge at the last second using En Avant, great ability again, in order to actually do things effectively. I just find it so engaging, and I'm really looking forward to playing more of it. I really hope we get some of those changes I suggested, but other than that, I guess that's going to be a wrap for my Dancer video. So sorry if it's a little bit rambly. I just really like talking about Final Fantasy XIV, which I'm sure you guys are used to. So be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned. I'll be doing thoughts videos on the other jobs in the next few days. I really need to get around to an Innocence EX video, even if it's just like my Titania one where I just walk through the fight. I just want to make one, you know. It's too late at this point. I have to get something out, so if it has to be that kind of quality, I hate to do it, but it's just what I'm gonna have to do. Anyway, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned. We'll have more news and everything about Final Fantasy XIV coming up on the channel. I'll see you guys next time, and until then, take care.